Hi class, welcome. We're going to be talking about Woodhouse a little bit, focusing on chapter 4. The last lecture video emphasized certain points from chapter 3. This one will be shorter than the last. I just want to highlight sort of a few key elements and maybe give a couple of examples to help explain some of this. So what I'm going to emphasize from chapter 4 is the 3 types of statements or claims highlighted, and you can see those here on the PowerPoint, right? 3 types of statements. So you've got empirical claims, a priori claims, and then normative claims. And it's sort of important to identify what sort of proposition, what sort of statements being made, so that we understand, right? We have a better understanding of how to evaluate them, because we use different standards of evaluation depending on what kind of claim is being made. There's different ways of defending or critiquing them. So I'm just going to sort of give a couple of examples and talk about some of the major sort of character traits of each of these. So empirical claims are the most common. They happen all the time, all around us. Your car is parked in a handicapped spot, right? That's an empirical claim. And you know, you're at work. Let's say someone says, "Hey, Bill, did you know you were parked in a handicapped spot?" And you think, "Oh, I didn't. That must have been an accident." You run down to try to repark your car. So with a claim like that, how do you know whether something like that's true or false? Well, you need sense experience. So you've got to use your eyes. Typically, in this particular scenario, that's going to be the main sense experience you're going to use. In other cases, you might use your sense of touch, smell, hearing, maybe all of them. If there is some question about an empirical claim, you know, like, is that car really blue? You might need some community support, so you might need to get other people to say, does that look blue to you? You know, does that look like a handicapped spot? Is this sign marked clearly to you? And you might have to try to get a kind of consensus there. But in any effect, if you're going to support or reject an empirical claim, you're going to need to use empirical science. You're going to use data, sense experience. So that's part of it. And this, again, is the most common type of claim that we make on a day-to-day basis. That's how we drive our cars to work. That's how we navigate our world, is through sense experience, communicating to others. How do you get somewhere? Turn left on Jacobson Street, make a right on 5th. And, right, these are all empirical claims. Empirical claims typically give us specific information about the world. So in the case of your car being parked in a handicapped spot, it's giving you information about where your car is parked. It's trying to communicate the way things are. Empirical claims can be true or false. Most of the time, empirical claims attempt to be true, but not all of them are. So a statement does not have to be true for it to be an empirical statement. It just means I'm trying to give you specific information about the world. It's the type of claim that's going to require sense experience to validate or invalidate. 2 important features of empirical claims. They are contingent, and I need to talk a little bit about this. Contingent is contrasted with necessary. If something's necessary, it has to be the case. If something's necessarily true, then it has to be true. If something exists necessarily, then it has to exist. It couldn't not exist. It's impossible for it to not exist, right? It's necessary. You contrast that with contingency. If something's contingent, it doesn't have to be the case, right? It is the case because of other things which made it the case, but if those other things were different, then this particular claim would be different, right? So it's not necessary, it's contingent. Typically, contingency means it's dependent on other things for its truth, for its validity, for its existence. So all human beings exist contingently, right? I don't exist necessarily. I did not have to be here. I am contingent on many factors. The most important probably being my mom and dad falling in love, having sex at the right time, right? And voila, I'm here. But I didn't have to be. My existence is contingent on all those other things taking place the way that they did. We often argue in Christian circles, right, that God's existence, though, would be necessary. God is dependent on nothing for God's existence. God has to be, right? So that's a difference there. With regard to truth, we often talk about necessary truths, truths that have to be the case, and then truths that are contingent. If someone comes to you and says, your car is parked in a handicapped spot, that statement, that empirical claim may be true, but it would be contingently true on you actually parking in that spot. You didn't have to park in that spot. It's not a necessary truth. You could have parked lots of different places, but in this case, you happen to park in a handicapped spot, making the empirical claim true contingently. So I hope that helps you with the difference between contingent truth, contingent existence, versus necessary truth and necessary existence. This word here is always fun, a posteriori, right? And essentially this just means empirical claims and empirical truth rely on sense experience. We determine their truth as a result of sense experience. That's a posteriori. In contrast to empirical claims, you have a priori claims. These are more rare. You don't find them as much. Maybe, I guess I've run into them more in philosophy circles, but in your everyday life, it doesn't happen a ton. In the book, on page 53, he breaks down a few different kinds of a priori claims. So we'll talk about a few of these. Before we do, a couple of features. A priori claims do not need sense experience for their truth. Sense experience might help us come to them, but sense experience is often unnecessary or at least inadequate, right, to justify a priori claims. A priori claims often give us very generalized information. Sometimes they even take the form of like universal definitions or claims, not specific, your car is parked in a handicapped spot, but it might be something like all triangles have 3 sides, right? All triangles have 3 sides, 3 angles that equal 180 and whatnot. Those are sort of a priori claims, general, right, to all triangles. An empirical claim might be that triangle on your desk is red. That's a specific piece of information, contingently true about a specific triangle sitting on the desk. But all triangles have 3 sides is not an empirical claim. It's more of an a priori definitional claim, right? So they often give us generalized information, but not new and specific information about the actual world. A priori claims are necessarily true. Again, when I say all triangles have 3 sides, that is a necessary truth. It cannot be false. There is no triangle with 2 sides. There are no triangles with 4 sides. All triangles have 3 sides, and that is necessarily true. It's also generalized. It doesn't give me specific information about any particular triangle. It tells me about all triangles universally. Similarly, all triangles have 3 sides. This is a definitional claim. Sense experience is inadequate. Think about it. How would sense experience justify my claim that all triangles have 3 sides? I mean, to do that, you would have to literally go look at, with your own 2 eyes, every single triangle in existence, both now, currently in existence, and every triangle that's existed in the past. Any triangle that might have existed in outer space or on the moon or something. Impossible. You can't validate that claim using sense experience because you can't experience with your senses every triangle. But it's a logical definition that must be true, so we can affirm its truth not by sense experience, but by reason. A priori claims are often based on reason, justified through reason, not through sense experience. That's a key point of a priori claims. So my definitional claim, all triangles have 3 sides. General, can't be verified using sense experience. It is verified using reason. It's not a contingent truth on any particular triangle, but a necessary truth about the logical nature of the universe, I guess, the way the world is. The book gives others, like other definitional claims. For instance, an example of an a priori claim in the book is all bachelors are single males. Again, I can't possibly go validate or verify that using sense experience. I can't go meet every single bachelor and see that they're a single male. It is true by definition, by necessity. You see the very general sort of universalized claim, all bachelors are single males. So this is an important distinction. Something that happens in papers with students, just to give you sort of a little side note, often students want to take empirical claims and treat them like a priori claims. What I mean by that is students will take some of their own experience. I'll give a really bad example. I have met 2 police officers in my life. They were both jerks. Therefore, police officers are just jerks, right? You have some specific empirical claims about 2 different instances where you met police officers. It was based on your sense experience with them, your encounter with them. And then you try to go from that to this sort of a priori generalization that all police officers are jerks. But that's just not the case. What happens in your papers is more subtle than what I've just done. But it'll be something like, we'll be talking about human nature. And a student will write a paper that human nature is evil. We have a fallen nature, original sin, or something like that. And then for evidence, they'll say, for instance, my son, when he was 2, he started telling me, like, lying and saying mine and taking toys away, but I never taught him those things. It was just part of his nature. Therefore, all humans must be evil by nature. So it's the same concept. How are you defending your view of human nature? You're giving me one specific example, an empirical claim about your child as they grew up, and then you're universalizing it to all humans. That creates a problem. So you want to be careful of that. If you're making empirical claims, then you justify it with sense experience. If you're making a priori claims, the way you justify and defend is going to be different and much more predicated on reason. The third type of claim is normative, right? And the normative claims are different. Both empirical claims and a priori claims are sort of trying to tell you about the world, the way the world is. We call that descriptive. Your car's parked in a handicap spot. I'm trying to describe the way the world is at this current moment, right? The state of your car. If I'm telling you all triangles have 3 sides, I'm trying to give you information about triangles. Descriptive, the way things are. Normative claims are not just telling you the way things are. Normative claims are telling you the way things should be, how things ought to be. Should and ought often occur in normative claims, right? Not always. Another way of thinking it, normative claims make moral judgments, evaluations, justifications. Normative claims make normative claims make moral judgments, justifications, right, evaluations. So if I say this man is immoral, that's a normative claim. I'm making a moral judgment about that person. If I say Osama bin Laden is evil, I believe that was in the textbook. That's a normative claim. I'm making a moral judgment. If you try to justify something as being right, if I say it's immoral for the government to tax us because it's taking money against our will, which fits the definition of stealing, I'm making a moral justification as to why I think taxation is immoral. Those are all normative claims, and you can't always derive, in fact, most of the time you cannot derive a normative claim from a list of descriptive claims, right? It doesn't work that way. It's often a mistake. In fact, we call this the naturalistic fallacy, when we attempt to derive an ought from an is. It's not always a problem when we do this, but most of the time it is. There are lots of examples. I give one down here, right? Within sociobiology, there's a common argument, and I think it has merit. When you look at primate communities, you see men being promiscuous because male primates can impregnate many women at the same time, but women can only be impregnated by one man at a time. Right? There's a long pregnancy, and so while the woman's pregnant, the male can go and impregnate other females. So within, again, primate populations, the males are often more promiscuous than the women. Their sex drives are higher and whatnot because the goal, in many respects, at least for sociobiologists, is procreation. For those that accept evolution, human beings are sort of on this primate track, right? We've evolved from primates. And so we shouldn't be surprised to see men having a higher sex drive and being more promiscuous than women. This is something we've inherited. Men, even amongst humans, can impregnate more women at once, and women can only get impregnated by one male. This is all descriptive. It might not be true, but that's not important. What's important is that these are all descriptive statements within sociobiology, but this has led some to say, therefore, it's natural for men to be promiscuous, and we shouldn't blame them for it, right? It's part of their nature. And so this normative claim is made that this is natural and therefore should be accepted. But this is a fallacy. We've moved from descriptive statements, empirical statements, and then tried to derive an ought from them. It could be the case. Let's just grant that men are more promiscuous by nature. We've inherited this from our biological past. It's very natural for men to have a higher sex drive. We can agree to all of that and then say, yes, but humans ought to react against their nature and be monogamous and faithful, right, to one partner. And we see that that's possible within human communities. So we could make that argument, right? Yes, I agree with your descriptive claims, but your descriptive claims do not support your normative claim. Normative claims require a different kind of justification, a different kind of evaluation. It's not simply empirical. Now we're talking about shoulds, oughts, the way things, right, ideally should be. And we can say humans have this tendency and they should react against it. I run into this fallacy at times with people when I get into arguments about change, as an example, right? Whatever it might be, like, well, I think we ought to move in a different direction, and then the reaction can at times be, well, we can't do that. We've always done it this other way. It's always been this other way, right? And so it's this clinging to the past, and I want to say, okay, well, that's a descriptive claim. That's an empirical claim about history. This is how we have done things in history. The fact that we have done things this way in history does not mean we should continue to do things this way. Your descriptive argument that says, well, we've always done it this way, is not a good normative argument about that we should continue to do it, right? How things have been is not necessarily the way they should be in the future. Again, think about the logic there. If we continue to adopt that logic, or if we had adopted that logic in the past, slavery would still be the case, right? We've always had slaves. Women have never had the right to vote. African Americans have always been inferior, or whatever the case is. If that was our view, and we said, well, the way things have been is the way things ought to be, nothing would change. Luckily, we've said, yes, that is the way things have been, but that was not a good policy. It should be different. And then we made a normative argument to try and change things. So these are just some examples of the ways in which we might get these types of claims confused. Empirical claims require sense experience and empirical data. A priori claims demand reason. We often go to consistency and compatibility and coherence there, right? These rational criteria. And normative claims can use empirical data. Rational claims can use rationality, but it has to be making an ought, right? We have to be talking about an ought and a should, not just an is. And we're going to talk about morality and virtue and how that might differ as we move through this course. But I hope this gives you some insight. There are some exercises within the chapter, and I think they might be helpful, so I encourage you to take a look at those exercises, maybe do a few practices just to make sure we're on the right track. If you have any questions, let me know.